My castaway this week is the musician and composer Rick Wakeman. Celebrated as a member of the prog rock titans, yes, his on-stage presence was marked by a sequined cape, shoulder-length blonde hair and terraces of multiple keyboards. It was, after all, the 1970s. In his years as a highly sought-after session musician, he lent his talents to everything from Cat Stevens' Morning Has Broken to Get It On by T-Rex. The landmark David Bowie album Hunky Dory is underpinned by his piano playing. My castaway's solo musical projects, from the Six Wives of Henry VIII to the Myths of King Arthur, have been complex orchestral affairs with multi-layered choral arrangements and the dry ice machine turned up to 11. His off-stage antics have also had a tendency towards the extreme. By the time he was 26, he'd had 3 heart attacks. By his 40s, he'd made and lost bundles of cash in spectacular fashion. And now, in spite of being a grandfather many times over, he's married to a glamorous 4th wife, 25 years his junior, and is still touring. He says, if they slice me in half, you would find over the top written through me. Everything in my life has been excess. Welcome, Rick Wakeman.
Thank you very much.
So you like to live life with a flourish, and I'm wondering, you know, to be proper rock and roll when you're nudging 70, a couple of years away, how tricky is that?
60 was a tricky one. Mind you, so was 50. I'm extraordinarily fortunate to be doing call it a job if you like, of what I love, which is music and entertainment. And I think that if you really love what you do, it does help to keep you young. I mean, I can't see myself ever stopping. I'd like to slow down a bit, I must admit. There are days when you go, oh, I wouldn't mind a game of golf that I have. But no, I'm not frightened of 70. I'm not frightened of 80 and 90. I just want to get there.
I mentioned there Rick Wakeman in the introduction, a sort of bastardised Spinal Tap reference. I said the ice machine turned up to 11, and I hope you didn't mind about that.
Not at all.
Were they really on about yes? I mean, you know, you've done all the sort of plastic dinosaurs and the pods coming up out the stage and the King Arthur on ice and so on.
There were a few bands that were involved, and I've got a lot from the horse's mouth. Harry Shearer is a great friend of mine. Yes, certainly the pods does relate to the Roger Dean stages that we had with Yes. And in the Spinal Tap film, there was the bit where the bass player gets stuck in this pod and had to break him open. Well, we had a giant clam made. I'm trying to make it sound serious. This is a serious programme, Wakeman. This giant clam which our drummer Alan White was in. And basically, as we started playing, the clam would open with all the lights and everything inside. But it had to be reasonably quick because there's no air in there. And I can't remember exactly where it was, but there was the night that it just didn't open, it just jammed. And eventually the crew are on stage. We're still playing, trying to prise it open with. Then they came out with some fire axes, and meanwhile Alan's suffering from a lack of oxygen, and his drumming's going all over the place because he doesn't know what the hell's going on. And eventually they smashed it open, and he came out, and the audience went nuts. They thought it was part of the act.
Let us go to the music, Rick Wakeman, and tell me about this first one. What have you chosen?
I've chosen Still Love You All by Kenny Ball because in the late 50s, my father worked for a building company in London called Nichols and Clark's, and one of the reps who worked with the company was called David Jones. And in his part-time, he was a semi-professional musician playing the clarinet for Kenny Ball and his jazzmen. David Jones came round the house, and I'm a sort of a 9-10-year-old, and it was great. Here's somebody who's actually made a record. And in fact, at the school I was at, we formed a trad jazz band. Every band had a uniform back then, and we couldn't afford a uniform. We were only 11, 12, so we turned our blazers and shirts around and became Brother Wakeman and the Clergyman. And we did try and play Still Love You All. It failed miserably because it was much too hard for the trumpet player.
Every gay was a gay carousel.
I Still Love You All, Kenny Ball and his jazzmen. I mean, it was actually shamefully unknown to me how many important bits of music that you had played on as a session musician. What are the skills that a session... You know, I think of you as a man with presence and a man with, I'm sure, in common with many people who have been stars in the rock music world, an ego. But as a... maybe we'll explore that later. But as a session musician, you have to sort of, I presume, sublimate all of that. You have to go in and do what's required.
I never planned to go into sessions. After I left the Royal College of Music, I just found myself doing a load. And the main criteria for doing sessions back in the late 60s and early 70s was being able to sight read music well. I mean, you could be doing Cilla Black 1 minute, Clive Dunn the next, Black Sabbath the next minute, and it was the most wonderful apprenticeship course.
David Bowie's Hunky Dory, considered by many people as one of the seminal albums of the last 50 years. When did you first hear the tracks you were going to play on, and what did you make of them in the beginning?
I'd already done Space Oddity with David, and then he called me up, and I was living in a little house in West Harrow, and he said, come round to my house, I want to play you some songs. And he lived in Beckenham in Kent. This house, to me, was huge. I called it Beckenham Palace. We went in there, and he had a minstrel's gallery with a nice grand piano, and he took out a battered old 12-string and said, listen to these songs. He said, make some notes if you want. He said, all the albums up to now have been guitar-based, because he was a folk singer originally, and he said, they've been guitar-based. I want this album to come very much from the piano. And he was playing through, and it's great songs, one after the other, and then he played Life on Mars. And I can remember sort of sitting back from the piano store and going, David, that is an amazing song. And he said, yeah, I'm pleased with it. Can you think of it sort of as a piano solo and we can all work round? I said, God, absolutely. It's such a clever piece in every respect. And that's exactly what we did. I mean, a lot of people have said the piano that you did on Life on Mars, you must have spent hours working that out. Truth of the matter is everybody had to work around me, so it was a wonderful thing to do. And David was very generous. He just said, you do what you feel to this piece.
And how much did you keep in touch over the decades?
I lived in Switzerland from 1976 till 1980, and David was also there in Switzerland. There was a lot of English people over there. I mean, Charlie Chaplin was over there. It was ridiculous. I was the only person there I didn't know. And David and I were, I call it neighbours. I mean, we lived on the same mountain. And we used to meet in this little club in Montreux called the Museum Club. And we would put the worlds to rights. And we used to meet up quite regularly when he was back from touring and I was back from touring.
Your own compositions are marked out by the multi-layered nature of their complexity and inventiveness. Are you ever defeated by your own musical ambition, I wonder?
I have admittedly written some stuff, especially orchestral stuff, that have turned out to be, I won't say unplayable, but close to it. There was one particular piece I wrote called Return to the Centre of the Earth, where I did all the orchestrations for the London Symphony Orchestra, and I wrote some piccolo trumpet parts. And one of the players, who I won't name, very, very fine players, he said to me, Rick, there's just the one problem. He said, it is playable, but we have to breathe. I went, that's a very good point.
Rick Wakeman, it's time for your second disc. Just tell me a bit about this.
I can't tell you exactly, but I think I was about 8 years old. And my father took me to Ealing Town Hall, where they used to do free concerts. This particular one is the first one my father took me to, and they played Peter and the Wolf. And I sat there in absolute, I was rapturous. Here was something completely different. Here was somebody telling a story to music. On that day, I came away and I said, that's what I want to do.
Really?
I want to write stories to music.
Early one morning, Peter opened the gate and went out into the big green meadow.
That was an extract from Prokofiev's Peter and the Wolf, and the narrator there, Rick Wakeman, was your friend and one-time collaborator David Bowie with the Philadelphia Orchestra, conducted by Eugene Ormandy. So let's go back a bit, Rick Wakeman. Born in 1949,
yeah.
It was. You were brought up an only child in Northolt in northwest London. Tell me more about your parents.
My father was a good musician. He was a fine piano player. During the war years, he was stationed out in Italy, in the army, but occasionally he would get hauled in to go and play at various concerts for different people. And I know that he did some accompanying for Harry Seacombe, the late Harry Seacombe. And he had a Bexton upright piano at home, which is the one I learnt to play on, and I still have. And he had, with my mother, a concert party, playing village halls and church halls and little theatres. And there was my father played the piano, Uncle Stan played the banjo and did George Formby songs, Uncle Laurie was the comedian, Aunt Esther, Aunt Olive and my mother used to sing, and they were known as the Wakeans. And they used to, on a Sunday night, round our tiny little house, how they fitted in, they used to relive those evenings. And I used to climb out of bed, aged about 3. I can remember to this day, come down the little stairs and sit at the bottom and listen and think, this is wonderful.
That's quite intoxicating.
Oh, it was unbelievable. And my father sent me off to piano when I was 5 to a wonderful teacher called Mrs. Symes, who I stayed with forever. between a third and a half of my father's income went on my piano lessons, which was astonishing when I look back. I mean, I found much of this out long after he'd passed away, and it really did. It hurt because you just want to go, look, can I just say a big thank you? You know,
Yeah.
He was an amazing influence on me, my father.
Aside from the music, what do you think his abiding influence on you has been then?
Like all growing teenagers and children, you don't really listen to your parents.
No.
So my father died in 1980, but I would say he talks to me and I talk to him more than we ever did now. Every now and then I'll do something, oh, yeah, Dad said that. He was dead right. And as I come down the stairs in our house, there's a picture of a lot of the families. I'm sort of coming down, and there's my father there. And I talk to him every morning and every night. He's been an amazing man.
Time for some more music, Rick Wakeman. Tell me about your next one. It's your third.
We're going back to the 50s, early 60s again, late 50s, early 60s. And I got a Dansette Major record player. I had 3 records. By that time, I had Still Love You All from Kenny Ball, this particular record, which is Have a Drink on Me, and a record called Snow Coach by Russ Conway. And I used to play them in rotation, which did drive everybody a bit nuts.
Well, he reined in his mule and he hitched him to the rail and he said, old feller, it's the end of the trail. On me, hey, hey, everybody drink on me.
Lonnie Donegan, Have a Drink on Me. Rick Wakeman, it was 1968, I think, when you began your studies at the Royal College of Music.
Yeah.
How did it suit you?
Well, looking back, it suited me well in many ways, but at the time I was a little bit gutted because I'd spent my life doing music, nothing else but music. So I arrived at the college and I'd sort of been one of the top guys in my area to get the scholarship into the college. I can remember walking down the practice room corridor, and there was one girl who was playing, and the door was open, and I said hello, and she said hello, and she was just amazing. And I said, how long do you practice a day? I was doing 3 hours, something like that, and she said, all day. I went, and how long have you been practicing all day? She said, always.
Gosh.
I went, right, okay. And I remember coming out, and then I was on a performance course, and I thought, I can't compete with this. And also, I don't want to dedicate myself to one particular type of music or one particular kind of composer, which was the norm then if you were going to go into performing, concert performing.
And so is that why, because I see looking at all the dates here, it was by 1970 that you were in the Straubs and that you decided that actually finishing that classical music training was indeed not for you and it wasn't where your future lay.
I was helped tremendously by my clarinet professor, Basil Tchaikov. Clarinet was my second study, and I'd already started getting sessions and getting session work, so I was starting to miss lectures and things, and I only got a £32 a year grant, which didn't even buy the first book, so sessions really helped to...
What would you get paid typically for a session back then?
£9.
Right.
I was along there one day for my clarinet lesson, and he said, I know you're doing these sessions. And I said, yeah. And he said, if I were you, I'd go down to your locker, empty it, walk out the main doors, walk across, and you walk up the steps to the Royal Albert Hall. He said, don't look back, but look at the Albert Hall and go, that's where I want to be. He said, then walk round the other side. He said, and don't come back. And that's exactly what I did. And it was many, many years later, I met him when Michael Aspel collared me for the This Is Your Life, and Basil was one of the guests. Right. And I spoke to him after. I said, can I ask you, sir, a question? He said, yeah. I said, why, with you as a professor of the college, did you tell me to leave or recommend for me to leave? He said, sometimes you don't have to finish the course to finish the course. He said, and you'd finished it. And amazingly enough, 47 years after that particular date, Colin Lawson, who was the principal of the college, and Prince Charles gave me my fellowship, which was just a big punch in the air moment for me.
Let's have some more music, Rick Wakeman. We're going to hear your fourth now. Tell me a little bit about this choice.
Schubert's Unfinished Symphony. I love Schubert. And my father had an old 78, well, a series of 78 of Schubert's Unfinished Symphony, which we used to play on his old 78 record player. The opening is incredibly quiet, and there was more surface noise on the record than there were. And I actually always thought that it was... I wondered what instrument made that amazing noise of all the... when you put it on.
That was part of the first movement from Schubert's Unfinished Symphony No. 8 in B minor, performed there by the Vienna Philharmonic and conducted by Sir George Solti. 1971, it strikes me, Rick Wakeman, was a pretty pivotal year for you. You got two of the most brilliant job offers at one time. You got one from David Bowie and the other from Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, what was it that decided you, and how do you look back on that choice now?
What had happened was I'd got a call from John Anderson and Chris Squire from Yes. Look, we want to change the things. We want to go more orchestral. How does that sound to you? And I said, well, yeah. And we'd rehearsed during the day, and I said, look, I've got to be away by 6 o'clock because I'm meeting David Bowie and Mick Ronson. So we finished, and they said, look, do you want to join? And I said, yeah, look, I think this could be really good. And so I had no idea what David... I thought David might be about doing a new album. And I went and met him, and he said, look, I want this band, Spiders from Mars, I want to put it together, and I want you and Mick to sort of front it and run it. I went, oh. And I love David Bowie. He's the most influential person I've ever worked with. But musically, I've got to be relatively selfish and go, how far can I go? And the answer is I can only go as far as what David's music will allow me to go. There will be a ceiling. Whereas with a band like Yes, which was growing, and David was miles bigger than Yes at the time, I've got a chance to take it on its journey. So I phoned up David and told him, and his actual words to me were, that's absolutely the right decision.
When did the Cape thing start?
Cape thing started in 1971 in America. There had been a review that said Wakeman played extremely well, but looked somewhat like a demented spider with legs and arms going everywhere, trying to reach keyboards and pedals. And I looked at that and I thought, I never thought about it. And then we played that particular evening, and I realised that to reach pedals, I was, I couldn't do it now, but I was lifting legs at sort of 90-degree angles and arms and things, and I thought, oh, crikey, this does look weird. And we played Hartford, Connecticut at a festival, and the local DJ was on there doing it, and he was wearing a cape, a three-quarter length cape, black with a star on it. I've still got it. And I thought, that is interesting. I didn't really think about it until he turned round. When he turned around to walk off, he was about 25 stone. And I thought, that covers a multitude of sins. And I had 10 $20 bills in my back pocket. And he came out, I said, I want to buy your cape. And I put it on and went on and played. And we had a wonderful, probably the most famous lighting man there is now, called Michael Tate, who used to work for us. And he came back afterwards, he said, you found the solution, but the cape's wrong. It needs to be sparkly, it needs to be full of things so that the lights can work with it, and it needs to be full length to cover all your legs and arms. And he said, and I know somebody who can make them for you. I went, thank you very much. It's interesting, when I go to some countries, South America in particular, they write it in the contract that I will wear one of the classic capes. It's a deal breaker otherwise.
Does it feel fine to still be wearing it now? I mean, I understand it was the 70s, the rules were different then. You were in your early 20s.
People expect it as well. John Anderson and Trevor Owen, we've just been out touring, and before even the tour started, we were rehearsing, John and Trev said, you are bringing a couple of capes, aren't you? And I said, absolutely, but thank goodness for that.
We're going to have to fit in the music, Rick Wakeman. I've got so much to ask you, and I can't believe we talked for so long about capes, but actually it was all interesting. Tell me about this next piece of music then. What are we going to hear now?
In the 60s, I played in a 17-piece soul band at the Top Ramp Ballroom in Reading. And we used to do all the Otis Redding stuff, all the Stack stuff, and I loved all of that. And Hard to Handle was just a great track. So when I saw on a playlist at Planet Rock, when I was doing my very irreverent Saturday morning show, that it was there on the playlist, Hard to Handle. I went, oh, great, Otis Redding. Oh, no, it's the Black Crowes. And we put it on and played it. I thought, if there's going to be a cover version of something, every band should go, can we make it different or better than the original? And they've certainly made it so different from the original.
Baby, here I am, I'm a man on the scene. I get no calls, so mama, I'm sure all the hand and I just around.
The Black Crowes and Hard to Handle. Rick Wakeman, long ago in the past, you talked about touring, and I'm guessing these were, the big days of the Yes touring years, being a lonely experience. And I'm thinking of groupies. I mean, it can't be that lonely, can it?
When you're a prog rock band, yeah. Most prog rock bands, the audience were 98% male. Basically, it was a weird period of time because after shows, I mean, I was a drinker back then. I mean, I've been teetotal since 1985, but I was an Olympic-style drinker.
I've read a couple of bottles of brandy a day and a couple of...
Well, I could mix brandy and port in a couple of bottles, and I used to drink port and brandy in pint glasses, which I thought was clever, but my liver didn't in the end.
Is that what, the 3 heart attacks in your 20s? I'm right about that, am I?
Yeah, I had 3 minor heart attacks. I spent 9 weeks in Wexham Park Hospital, yeah.
But you didn't stop drinking until quite a long time after that.
No, I know, and I was also a smoker back then. I mean, my saving grace, I think, was I truly have never even popped a pill. I've never taken any drugs in my life, never smoked a joint, never done anything.
I mean, why?
Because something you mentioned earlier, I have an excessive, extreme personality, which is if I do something, I have to go the whole hog with it. I mean, when I used to smoke, I stopped in 1979, I would smoke 30, 35 a day. I couldn't have a glass of wine. It would have to be a bottle of wine. I couldn't have one keyboard. I had to have 20. Everything was excess.
And how did you manage to kick the booze then?
It did finally catch up with me, and I had alcoholic hepatitis. And I had a very good doctor friend who said, that's it, your drinking days are over. And said, do you want any help because you've been a heavy drinker to stop? And I went, nope. I walked out of his surgery and went to the old Straw's pub, which was the Duke of York in York Street in London. And I knew the landlord in there well, and he said, pint of bitter and a large Scotch, Rick? I said, no, I've a tomato, I don't drink anymore. And I can put my hand on my heart and say I haven't had a drink since that day. And what it was when the doctor actually said to me, and he was a good friend, he said, Rick, if we don't do something really quick, he said, I don't give you 6 months. And I think it was total fear. People say, what would you say hypothetically if somebody said, if you don't stop that, you'll die? It doesn't work hypothetically. But when it's the real situation, then it hits home.
I've seen photographs of you surrounded by, I don't know how many, but countless vintage cars and all these hundreds of keyboards and all. What's your I mean, you came from humble beginnings.
Yeah.
What is your relationship with money? How you spend it, when you spend it, why you spend it?
I've been a self-investor, which sometimes is a wise move and sometimes not a wise move.
So that's funding big shows and so on.
Yeah, funding the big shows, which I've done, and sometimes it pays off and sometimes it doesn't pay off. I used to play what we call double-up blackjack with music, which will always end in disaster because you make an album, the record company give you X amount, but you add to it the money you made from the previous album to make an even bigger album and the concert. That's successful, so you use all the money from that for the next one. Sooner or later, you're going to make one that doesn't do that, that doesn't have that success. So you're back to zero again. And that's the way that I worked. And then, of course, you have to allow for the fact when the early 80s came, the sort of music that I was doing at the time was about as popular as putting condom machines in the Vatican. I mean, it was just no hope at all. You know, there was suddenly from selling hundreds of thousands and millions of records to nothing. And you go, oh, whoops. But I've never let things get me down. It's I probably should have chosen the old dust yourself off and start all over again.
But you haven't. But let's hear your next one. What's your 6th?
Woodman, Woodman, Spare That Tree by Phil Harris. My father, he had this wonderful collection of 78s, and there was one side was called the Darktown Poker Club, and the other one was Woodman, Spare That Tree. And I love the idea of a man sheltering away from his wife up a tree.
There is a tree grows near our house. It's been there quite some time. Now the tree split it into kindling wood and then spread it around the town.
That was Phil Harris and Woodman, Woodman, Spare That Tree. Rick Wakeman, there was a point at which, I mean, you came and went several times from the supergroup, yes. You went the first time at the very height of the success and fame that you'd all worked hard for. Are you something of a contrarian?
I'd like to think of myself as honest. I mean, I left Yes in May 1974 for the first time. The album that we were about to do and the album that we'd just done wasn't particularly how I felt it should have ended up and how it should be. And music, if you're part of a band, I think it's really important. There's got to be an equal amount of give and take. And because I wasn't overwhelmingly happy with how the music was going, I felt that I couldn't give the amount that I wanted to give and certainly couldn't take from the music what I wanted to take. And then 2 years later, John called me and sent me some ideas and things that he'd got as regards the album which became Going for the One and a great track called Wakeman. And we'd sort of gone on a different route and ended up at the same place. So I hopped on a plane, went over to Switzerland and rejoined.
Would you say you're a workaholic?
Yeah.
What effect do you think that's had on your life?
I find it hard to say. You become quite selfish. I mean, I'm incredibly happily married. I've got a wonderful wife and wonderful kids and grandchildren and things, but music tends to rule my life.
You're a father of 6 children. What kind of father do you think you have been?
in spite of the fact of marriage breakups and divorces, I think they would say that I did the best under all the circumstances. But for me, there are areas of parenting where I think I was disappointing, which it does affect me a bit. I'm like, should have done that, could have done that, could. But we speak all the time, all of them, and I'm there for them all. And I like to think that parenting carries on for all of their lives. It's not just the early days.
How did you meet your fourth wife, Rachel?
Rachel came to interview me, and we had the interview, and she just said, if you're ever in town and fancy a coffee. And I said, great, okay. So met out and had coffee and the odd lunch. Once she'll kill me for saying this. One day she said, ask me out properly. And I said, you're got a lot younger than me, if I'm not sure. She said, who cares? I don't care. And we just found that we got on fantastic and we're extremely happy.
It's an act of unbridled optimism, a fourth marriage.
Well, you see, I have this view that, I'm a great believer in marriage. I really am. And I've learnt to understand in life that we don't get everything right first time. It just so happens it took me 4 times to find my soulmate, who I love dearly. So, optimist, I think it's belief.
Let's have your next piece of music, Rick Wakeman. We're on your 7th. Tell me about this.
I'm a huge choir fanatic, probably because my singing voice is so bad. I don't even sing in the shower. It's really bad. But I love hearing the human voice. And being a big opera buff as well, and loving Italy and the Italian, you can't really beat Verdi in the Anvil chorus.
That was the Anvil Chorus from Verdi's Il Trovatore, with the Metropolitan Opera and Chorus conducted there by James Levine. Rick Wakeman, you were baptised, I think, when you were 19, and as we were listening to that, we were just talking during it about the uplifting and the spiritual nature of the choirs there. And I wonder, where is your faith now? Is it a weekly and important, a daily part of your life?
No, it's a daily part. I have a very strong faith. Like a lot of people, I have question marks over the word religion. I sometimes wonder if religion's got anything to do with faith whatsoever. But I have a strong faith. When I was again a little lad, my father, who was a deacon at West End Baptist Church in London, because it was deemed too far to me to go, I was sent down to South Harrow Baptist Church, and my father basically said to me, he said, Richard, if you enjoy yourself down there, that's fine. If you don't enjoy it, you don't have to go. And I loved it. And in 1969, I decided that because I knew that my association with the church was about to end, because I'd be away touring, and also at one time there was never any shows or theatres on a Sunday, it was dark nights. That was changing. So Sundays were a working day, and I just thought, I'd like to, I suppose, complete my own faith course.
You're touring again now. I'm wondering what your backstage rider is these days, Rick Wakeman. What do you demand
it's easy
to make you happy?
It's called tea and coffee, 3 bottles of still water, 3 bottles of sparkling water. It's not good, is it? I remember the days when my rider was, I've still got one somewhere, 26 pages long, all alcohol, and at the bottom it just read peanuts optional extra.
How do you imagine your survival or not on this island? Are you a very practical person? I know you're a gardener, actually.
Oh, yeah. My wife and I love our garden. She's the great flower, shrub and tree person, and I'm the veg man. This is what happens to old rockers, you see. We grow vegetables. Yeah, I think I would survive, yeah.
Tell me about your final track, then.
My final track is The Who, which is My Generation, and I loved this record when it came out, and I became very, very close friends with the late John Entwistle. He told me a wonderful story about My Generation. It's got a bass solo in it. It was the first rock record ever to have a bass solo. And I said, it's a great solo. He said, I just did it the once on record, but the record became so huge that when they went to play it live, he said, I would do a solo, but obviously it wasn't the same as the record because it was a solo. People would come after and saying, got it wrong, got the bass part wrong. He said, no, I didn't, it's a solo. He said, and in the end, after about a year, he said, I gave up. He said, and I took the record into a hotel room with my bass and I learnt it.
People try to put us to down. Why don't you all fade away?
The Who, My Generation. It's time then, Rick, for me to give you the books. Every castaway gets the Bible and the complete works of Shakespeare, and they get to take one other book along with them. What is yours going to be?
My Bible, when I was at the Royal College of Music, and also afterwards for all the orchestrations I do, is a book called Principles of Orchestration by Rimsky-Korsakov, because it basically tells you how to break all the rules. And the thing that I learned from that was breaking the rules is what makes music unique. But you've got to know what the rules are before to know how to break them properly.
That's yours. You're allowed a luxury.
The luxury, there's only one, which is a piano.
Has to be. Of this list of 8, which one do you think is going to be the one that you would save from the waves?
It would be the Anvil Chorus, because you can listen to the Anvil Chorus and either want to jump up and down and march along, or you can actually just lie back and reflect in the magnificence of the whole work. So it could cover quite a multitude of feelings.
OK, it's yours. Rick Wakeman, thank you very much for letting us hear your Desert Island Discs.
You're very kind, thank you.